friends, in the series which we are doing on the making of contemporary India from 1950 to 1990s, today we will talk about the Constitution of India, and in the part 1 we will talk about the coming of the Constitution, the way it was being enacted, the way it was being written by the Constituent Assembly, and how the various features of the Indian Constitution they reflect the various ideas which were associated with the national movement as well. And when we tend to understand the Constitution, we find that Constitution is a kind of a document, and this document, it in a way tries to present the hopes, ideals and aspirations of the people, and it has some kind of a specific legal value as well. So Constitution of India, when it was being enacted by the Constituent Assembly, and the kind of legal sanctity it had, and because of which we find that many of the times always we have to see the laws which are being framed by the Parliament are in consonance with the Constitution. So when we talk about the Constitution of India, the kind of contribution which was made by the people, those who were associated with the national movement, and their ideas, their ideals and their aspirations, they are being reflected in the Constitution of India. When we tend to understand the Constitution of India, some of the references which one can see is Bipin Chandra's India Since Independence, Ramchandra Guha's India After Gandhi, D.D. Basu Introduction to the Constitution of India. So these are some of the initial readings which one can refer. Apart from that, the Granville Austin, the Indian Constitution, B.L. Grover and Introduction to Modern India. So these are some of the readings which one can refer when one is trying to understand the Indian Constitution, when one is trying to situate Indian Constitution. And as we are aware that when India became independent in 1947 and the Constitution got enacted in 1949, and thereafter it was enforced on 26 January 1950 to commemorate the 20 years or the anniversary of the Independence Pledge, which was taken by the people, those who were associated with the national movement. So in this way, when we tend to understand the Constitution, we find that the people, those who were associated with the Constitution in terms of framing the Constitution, how these people, they were not only from the British India, they were also from the princely states, as you can see on the screen as well. When we talk about the Constituent Assembly, the number of the members, as you can see on the screen, is 389 members, 296 from the British India and 93 from the princely states. So initially we find that the Constituent Assembly, it comprised the members from the British India. You can see the image as well, the members of the Constituent Assembly on the screen, and these people, those who were part of those who were being elected from the regions which were under the British rule. And apart from that, there were other members also, those who were from the princely states as well. And when the Constituent Assembly met and when it decided to have the Constitution in a written form, then they also constituted a number of committees, and these committees, for example, the drafting committee, which was one of the important committees and which was finally responsible in terms of drafting the Constitution, and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was the chairman of this committee. So we find that different committees, they played an important role in terms of framing the Constitution, and we also find that the Constituent Assembly was not elected on the basis of the universal adults franchise, and it was not as truly representative in character, and also because only Muslims and Sikhs were recognized as minorities which were deserving their special representation. So when we talk about the kind of representation which was there in the Constituent Assembly, so we find that the idea of universal adult franchise was not applied on it, and it was also being argued that it was not truly representative in the sense that other minorities apart from Muslims and Sikhs, they were being left out. And when we also talk about the kind of perspectives which were there in the Constituent Assembly, then we find that the Congress Working Committee in early July 1946, it instructed the Provincial Congress Committees, PCCs, to include the representatives of scheduled caste, Parsis, Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians, tribals and women in Congress list for the general category. So there was an attempt by the working committee so that more and more people from diverse sections, they are being included in the general category, and Congress made an effort in that sense that the diversity of the perspectives is available in the Constituent Assembly, so that they are able to represent the diverse sections of the society. And we also find that the way the Constitution was enacted, the way the Constitution was written, the way the Constitution was enforced, the various stages when you talk about in terms of the Constitution, we find that the focus was to make the best talent available. So more and more members from diverse sections, they were being initiated in they were being asked to come to the Constituent Assembly, and Gandhiji himself, he suggested names of 16 eminent persons for inclusion in the Congress list. And we also find that 30 people, those who were not the members of the Congress, were elected on the Congress ticket. So this is how we find that the people, those who not only belong to one political party, they became the members of the Constituent Assembly. Rather, the focus was on bringing people from different sections of the society, people those who were eminent, the people those who had this kind of a knowledge or sensitivity to understand the socio-economic, political, emotional, psychological conditions which were prevalent in India, so that the Constitution becomes a total reflection of those aspirations and ideals which were there during the national movement. And when we talk about the Constituent Assembly, we find that on 20th November 1946, the decision to convene the first session of the Constituent Assembly on 9th December 1946, it was being announced. And the oldest member, Dr. Satchidanand Sinha, he became the provisional president of the Constituent Assembly, and later Dr. Rajendra Prasad, he was being elected as the president of the Constituent Assembly, and he was the one who presided the meetings of the Constituent Assembly. So when we talk about the kind of ideas with which the Constituent Assembly which worked in that particular framework and what it wanted or intended to achieve, then we will find that how they were deciding it for the people of India, that how the Constitution is able to reflect the aspirations of the people of India. And they tried to bring in other parties as well, Muslim League being the dominant party apart from the Congress, and which was talking about the partition of India from 1940 onwards. Then it was not ready to become a member, or it did not want its members to attend the sessions of the assembly, and it refused to join the deliberations which were being convened by the Constituent Assembly. And when we say that how when Rajendra Prasad, Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected as the permanent chairman, thereafter he was designated as the president of the assembly. So these were some of the developments which were taking place at that point of time, and how Muslim League, which did not want to become the part of the Constituent Assembly, did not want to deliberate on the matters which were there at that point of time. And on 13 December we find that the objectives resolution was moved by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and this objectives resolution, its adoption was postponed to enable the representatives of the Muslim League and the princely states to join. And another session was held from 28th to 22nd January 1947, and thereafter it was decided that we should not wait any longer for the League, and the objectives resolution, it was being passed. And we find even in the third session the Muslim League did not join, and finally on 3rd June, Mountbatten Plan was announced, and this plan, it made it very clear that India was to be partitioned. So, this idea of the partition of India was reflected in the Mountbatten Plan of 3rd June, and thereafter we find that the situation in the context of India from different perspectives, it deteriorated also, which we can see in the framework of the partition violence, that how people from India to Pakistan and from Pakistan to India, how they made such kind of efforts where they had to move from one country to another, and how these people, they became refugees in their own country. And it was also a big problem that how during the times of partition and thereafter, when this kind of violence was unleashed on the people, then it was very difficult to resettle all these people in a very short span of time. And we find that this idea, this plan of resettlement, it continues for a very long period of time. And we also find that during this period, when India became independent, Constituent Assembly, it became some sort of a sovereign body, and it also doubled as a legislature for the new state. And we also find that how Constituent Assembly, it was being held responsible for the framing of the Constitution in that sense. And when we tend to understand the way the committees it functioned, the kind of measures it undertook, and then we find that various kinds of phases could be or stages could be seen. And we find that all these committees which were being framed under the Constituent Assembly, they were asked to present reports on the basic issues. And one of the constitutional advisor, B.N. Rao, he prepared an initial draft on the basis of the reports of these committees and his own research into the constitution of other countries. So a lot of research went in that sense, that how people associated with the constitution, how these people were trying to learn from the other constitutions of the world, how constitutions of USA, UK, Ireland and other countries, they were being read, so that a better understanding of the laws or the articles which are there in the constitution could be developed by the people, those who were associated in terms of developing the constitution or the framing of the constitution. And if you see the third stage, where we talk about the drafting committee, which was in a way chaired by Dr. Ambedkar, and how it presented a detailed draft of the constitution, which was later published for public discussion and comments. So there was some kind of a thrust where all sorts of democratic options, they have to be exercised by the people, those who are engaged in the making of the constitution. And it was very well discussed, and thereafter, and the kind of changes which were being proposed by the people, they were also taken care of. And finally, we see that how the constitution was adopted, and when the constitution was adopted, and thereafter from 26 January 1950 onwards, when the constitution was enforced, and how it became very relevant till even now, where we have to see that nothing is being done which is against the Constitution of India, which is considered to be sacrosanct in nature. And there is a lot of debate with regard to the basic features of the Constitution, that how some of the features of the Constitution, how they are sacrosanct, how they have that kind of a sanctity, where any law which is against these principles, they should not be enacted. And when we talk about the contribution of the various leaders, those who were associated with the Congress at that point of time, and how these leaders, they played an important role in terms of framing of the constitution, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, all these people, they played an important role in terms of not only providing inputs or their ideas, but at the same time playing an important role in terms of mobilizing their opinions and ideas. And when we talk about the objectives resolution, we find that the philosophy and the basic features of the constitution, they have been given in the objectives resolution, and how Sardar Patel, he played an important role in bringing the representatives of the princely states into the constituent assembly, and the elimination of the separate electorates, and in squashing any move for the reservation of seats for religious minorities. So we find, and we are very well aware, that the role of Sardar Patel in terms of integration of the princely states, and when all these princely states, they got integrated into the Indian Union, then it became easier for them to send the representatives into the constituent assembly. And Patel was also very well aware that how the separate electorates, they had to be eliminated if any kind of an idea in terms of unity was to be promoted among the masses. And they also were also very, he was also very concerned that how the reservation of seats for the minorities or religious minorities, that should also take place. So all these things, all these considerations were very important, and they were also kept in mind. And Granville Austin, he talks about the democratic constitution with a socialist bias was framed so as to allow nation in future to become as socialist as its citizen desired or its needs demanded. So the constitutional experts like Austin, they see Indian constitution in the framework of a democratic constitution, and how some kind of a bias which was there in the context of socialism, that how when the nation will decide in the future, so nation could become some sort of a socialist nation. And so these kind of things, they were there at that point of time when the constitution was not only discussed, but at the same time when it was being implemented in terms of enactment as well as enforcement. And another important aspect which has been associated with the constitution is that how some kind of a framework for a democratic setup and a parliamentary form of government is being talked about. And the adoption of the parliamentary system was taken with debate on panchayat based indirect elections and decentralized government, but it did not have widespread support. So we find the idea of adult suffrage was very important from the framework of how the constitution was to be enacted, the way the things or the ideas which are to be incorporated in the Constitution of India. And when we talk about the parliamentary form of government, so it will be some sort of a representative government of the people of India. And when you see that the kind of debate which took place in the Constituent Assembly, then they talked about the panchayat based indirect elections as well, and some sort of a decentralized government. But when this thing was put on discussion, we find that it did not have the kind of support, and more people or the members, they were more concerned, and the parliamentary form of government appealed to them. And when we tend to understand that in the framework of the people, those who were seen to be more aware about the development of constitutions and their procedures, one of the constitutional expert, Alladi Krishna Swami Iyer, he suggested that the assembly has adopted the principle of adult franchisee with an abundant faith in the common man and the ultimate success of democratic rule. The only and alternative to adult suffrage was some kind of indirect election based upon village community or local bodies. That was not found feasible. So people, those who were also associated in terms of knowing about the constitution, they were also very aware, not only concerned, but they were also they also knew that the principle of adult franchisee, where everyone who is beyond a particular age will get the right to vote, and this will provide the kind of power or authority to a common man, because there will be no restrictions on their of any kind on them, and all of them, they will attain the right to vote. and this will be also the foundation of some kind of a democratic rule. And when they were talking about any kind of alternative which they could think about, think apart from the adult suffrage, so they talked in the framework of the indirect elections in the any kind of village community or the local bodies, but they could not find that this idea was all that appealing. And when we talk about scholars like Granville Austin, who calls the direct election by adult suffrage the gong, the single note, whose reverberations might awaken or at least stir sleeping India. So scholars like Austin also, they see the idea of direct election to be the most important aspect, and how it will in a way try to awaken the sleeping India. And other scholars, they have also seen the kind of ideas which were there with regard to adult suffrage and its social implications, and they were not only concerned about the political implications or importance or significance, rather they were trying to see the social implications and how social groups which were previously unaware of their strength and how they were barely touched by the political changes that had taken place, they will suddenly realize that they were in a position to wield power. So K. M. Panikkar has given this kind of an idea where he is not only talking about the social he is not only talking about the political significance, but he is talking about the social implications, that how it will provide more power to the people, those who were marginalized, the people those who were not aware about their strength, and they were not into the political or any kind of a social mainstream. And in that sense, we will find that the new groups at the lower end of the social hierarchy, they will learn to experiment with the different political parties and candidates for securing their felt needs. And it will also force the elite candidates to seek favor of the people, those who were at the lowest rungs of the society, because they will be the people those who will decide their fate in the politics when they will go and seek the votes. And when we find that earlier times, if you compare it, then we will find that there were a lot of restrictions in the earlier period, and property and other kinds of restrictions they were being placed in the earlier times. And during when constitution was enacted, we find that there were so many challenges, as you can see on the screen: the partition, idea of nation building, promoting the national integration, the kind of divisions which were there, economic, caste and gender inequalities, and poverty. So all of them we will discuss in our next lecture, when we will talk about the other aspects of the Constitution of India. Thank you very much.